Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cybercriminals are hiding in the conversation. Cybercriminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified these 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to all of our podcast feeds for all of our shows. Have that content downloaded to your device each and every week. You can find our mailing list, Discord server, follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, as well as find episode starter packs for Paul's Security Weekly. If you go to securityweekly.com/subscribe and click the link for episode starter packs, it'll take you to a page with some Spotify playlists where I've gone into the archives and selected some awesome episodes. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcast and technical trainings, securityweekly.com/on-demand. On to the news for this week. I really want to start. I know it's not security related. I mean, perhaps we can segue into the microcode decryptor story from here, since we're going to be talking about laptops. But you know, my funny pun was, this is the coolest Linux laptop. So this is a laptop from Tuxedo, which is a German-based computer company that makes, from what I understand, Linux ready. Like,
yes,
you can put Linux on all their laptops, kind of stuff. And they've come up with this laptop called the Stellaris 15 Gen 4. It has pluggable modules, or what did they call it? They called it something. There's a clamp system where you can attach a liquid cooler to the laptop.
It's got the water block.
Right, so it's got a in and out, right? And you got they have a separate liquid cooler.
Yep.
That is gigantic.
It's called Aquarius.
And then it connects to the laptop. I don't understand.
Of Aquarius.
So you can connect a radiator. You can buy a
Aquarius?
radiator for your laptop and hook up the hoses to your laptop.
Exactly. And so So people missed that. Adrian, would repeat what you said?
It's basically like there's a radiator in the laptop, and you're hooking up a water pump, like to use in a car, metaphor here.
Yes.
To the radiator and start pumping
liquid over your CPU.
Yeah.
But the laptop still functions without it, I would assume.
I guess if it doesn't get too hot, but I will say, in my experience was that once you go water cooled, you can't go back, because you can't just detach the radiator because there's not a heat sink.
It's going to dribble stuff everywhere.
Well, that too, but I mean, we're all used to that. But I mean,
no, it actually is air cooled. The laptops that are
air cooled,
this,
I know, but typically with those water blocks, when they put the water block on the CPU, it's not as efficient in the same way.
Because it's not a heat sink; it's a water block.
It's not a heat sink; it's a water block.
Yeah, I got you.
I would get. Maybe you can, but I can't imagine running it without the radiator. That just sounds.
Well, the liquid cooling system weighs 3 pounds and looks pretty massive. The laptop looks pretty. I just don't understand how this is portable for a laptop. I don't understand the use case here.
I didn't get it.
If you want a liquid cooled computer, you're going to have a desktop, and they make self-contained liquid cool. In fact, we've used them here in the studio. My system.
You can watch the video of us installing
Is your
one.
system at home liquid cooled?
Yeah,
mine is too. Right. I mean, you only have 128 gigs of RAM. I get that. I have to remind Doug of that.
Okay, I'm leaving. This memory shaming is just continued to the point.
I have 256 gigs of RAM in my desktop,
but he doesn't know how to use it.
I can't fire enough VMs to use the extra RAM.
It's just kind of flappy.
Sorry, Adrian, you were saying.
I would assume hooking up this thing, maybe it knows when you plug. Damn it! I'm beta testing a webcam. It's the first professional.
It's Dr. Tung's 3D house of webcams.
It's very professional.
Yeah. Adrian, I think you're on a really good point though, because I want to talk about your webcam briefly too. While we're on hardware, we might as well go with it. But
so the webcam gets really hot too.
It does.
Has,
and then
you have a water-cooled webcam.
Maybe it needs water cooling. But if the laptop has to sense that you've connected the liquid cooler, no?
Because I'm assuming it unlocks some level of performance that you can't have unless you have the cooler plugged into it.
I mean, it's a very interesting hardware concept to me because I never saw that kind of design, but that doesn't mean it's not there. The ones we did were sort of all or nothing, and you didn't really have a lot of cooling without it.
But to your point, Doug, I think it would make sense to have a laptop that if I were going somewhere, I could disconnect it from the liquid cooler, go use it, not in like high performance game mode to Adrian's point, come back to my desk. Now I want to use high performance game mode. I connect it to the liquid cooler.
And if the CPU supports that kind of scaling down and up kind of thing, then you may be able to run it at that lower level.
Some interesting hardware design though, where the disconnect procedure must be very specific so that the pump would have to remove all of the liquid off the CPU.
Not if it's sealed.
Or you disconnect
Not if it's sealed right
So you're saying it's a closed, so some
if
liquid
it was
remains?
a snap out and it's sealed at the it's going to be
there's
ugly.
A valve. There has to be a valve.
That just sounds like a disaster.
It sounds like there's going to be driven.
Because I built quite a few desktops that had external radiators.
I built one. They all leaked. Did all of yours leak? Every single one of them.
It didn't last long. Yeah, it was just a disaster. And I mean, I don't know.
There's nothing worse than green liquid spilling all over your computer, your office,
your clothes,
in the carpet.
Like,
it's bad.
Because you come in,
or maybe it comes with a diaper that you put around your laptop.
There you go.
For when you disconnect the hoses.
It comes with a special mat, so
so you have to carry an aquarium with you to put your laptop in.
It's like a grill. It's like a grill. It has a drip pan underneath the connectors. There's a little drip pan.
I actually suggested that. I mean, we used to use boot trays under it because it leaked so bad, and we put boot trays under it to catch the goo so it wouldn't get in the carpet. But yeah, I mean,
I see TSA not liking this at all. Getting detained.
Okay, it's a challenge for you, Tyler.
You're bringing liquid on the plane.
How many ounces? How many ounces does this laptop hold?
Is the TSA approved?
We want a video of Tyler getting the heat sink radiator and cooling fluid through TSA at I don't know. Let's pick one. Maybe JFK. I think would be a good choice.
That would be a fun one.
So most laptops are liquid cooled. But it's like a sealed system.
Yeah,
I imagine it can't dissipate that much heat because you've only got 8 inches of copper tubing,
and it's still airflow. I mean, you still got to have airflow across the radiator somewhere. Yes. So there's just so much room in that case for air to move through there. So I don't know. I mean, it's not something I would consider buying. I mean, I can't imagine I need a Linux laptop with that level of performance that I need water cooling to keep it cool. But
no. You can't put Linux on this yet.
Oh,
so they're working on Linux support. Yep. If you read the article, it's Windows right now, and they're working on Linux support to get this to work.
Did you see that this water pump is also controlled via software using a Bluetooth connection?
Yeah.
So even though you have to physically connect this thing to your laptop, it's just hoses.
Yeah, you still have to work.
I was wondering if they had like a USB connection from the liquid cooler and then software to control the liquid cooler, but what you're saying, Adrian,
it's Bluetooth. Yeah, it's like your phone. It's an app.
So
that sounds like a really bad idea.
Really bad idea. Yeah, it sounds like a sex
toy
that can be hacked.
It's getting worse all the time. Yeah, it's like now you've got. Yeah, it's just there's just nothing redeeming.
I did more on Linux laptops, so I did listen to some podcasts that were talking about Linux. I listened to a few Linux podcasts. I haven't picked like a clear winner yet, but they were talking about the HP Dev 1. They were talking about Tuxedo. I don't know if they mentioned Purism. And they talked about one other one, Stellar something, didn't get great reviews, but like unanimously across 2 different podcasts talking about Linux laptops, the clear winner that everyone said that they even had them in their car and they kind of chickened out was the Framework laptop. Adrian.
Oh, nice.
And Josh, did you buy one too, the Framework?
I absolutely have one. I love this thing.
And you guys both love them, right?
Oh my God. I maxed this sucker out. 64 gigs of RAM. I've got a 2 terabyte drive in it now, and I've got a 1 terabyte drive to install Fedora on and play with. The ports are insane.
You get a bunch of the little modules?
I actually only bought one. I bought an HDMI module and the rest USB-Cs because I just had USB-C. But it's so nice. You can actually put a storage dock. You could put a terabyte drive in one of the modules.
Yeah, so I've got a terabyte drive. I've got that module. Damn it.
Yeah, so I ordered mine and it's shipping in August. So I can't wait. Of course,
and my daughter helped me put it together.
Ones.
And they're upgradable, so you can upgrade you can upgrade everything on them, screen, everything.
Yeah, the bezel. You can change the color of the bezel on your screen. You can upgrade your entire screen module, your CPU, your keyboard, the color of your keyboard, whatever you want. It doesn't matter.
And that bezel is just held on with magnets.
Nice.
Like you can just peel it right off of there.
That's cool. I did look into the firmware on it. So the EC firmware is the same open source EC firmware that's used by Chromebooks. Unfortunately, the UEFI BIOS firmware is from Inside. It's Inside H2O. Framework licensed the source code from them and make their own modifications to it, which gives it a slight advantage that it's controlled by Framework, but it is not core boot. There are efforts to get core boot on these laptops, which I'll be excited about. So moving in the right direction, I think, firmware-wise.
And you can just jump on the forum and chat with the hardware designers.
Yeah.
They respond in the forum.
They've got an awesome forum. Their forum runs on Discourse. It's an awesome forum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just for sort of comparison purposes, I looked at a Mac, MacBook Pro. I looked at a Lenovo. I looked at what else? The Framework, because of Adrian, totally because of you, sir, and a couple of others. And the answer was really simple. There's not a single other laptop I can buy other than maybe an MSI or a Sager that'll give me 64 gigs of RAM, and none of them would give it to me at the price. It was $2,500 fully kitted out, roughly.
Yeah.
And nobody else would do it for that price.
Yeah, they don't penalize you for RAM upgrades like most companies. What they charge you for just like a basic RAM upgrade or disk upgrade is insane. And usually those are paired together. Like if you want, the fancy screen or something like that, like you have to get more RAM, or if you want a bigger disk, then you have to get more RAM. Like most companies don't let you mix and match that stuff. Like what if I only want 256 gigs of storage and max RAM? Like a lot of companies don't even let you do it.
What about like video cards and stuff? Does it let you integrate and change out the video cards?
No, they're not discrete video cards.
I think it's embedded video.
It's on board. Yeah. Yeah, they're all
that was the only caveat, Tyler. Your recommendation for my MSI laptop has an NVIDIA graphics card in it, which is awesome. But that's not the norm to have NVIDIA in. It's most of the gaming laptops that have.
I had an MSI.
Nice. Yeah.
And the battery life is
terrible,
less than stellar.
Yes. Try upgrading
It's a 3080, man. What do you expect?
Yeah, well, that's why, because they put the NVIDIA cards in there. You can try upgrading your EC firmware if there's one available that may improve battery life. You have to read through the release notes, but your EC firmware controls some of your the battery functionality and can improve battery.
I mean, let's be honest, Tyler, when your video card name is also the number in minutes that your laptop runs on battery, 30 to 80 minutes, you got a problem, dude.
Yeah. Alrighty.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
That is
no, I had one.
This week, Hardware Weekly with the Security Weekly crew. Critical flaws in a GPS tracker enabled disastrous and life-threatening hacks. What I was like gathering is they were talking about these GPS devices in vehicles, and I was like, is this part of the vehicle? Is this something I add on to my vehicle? If I add it on to my vehicle, they're talking about how it can cut fuel and enable the brakes. But it turns out these are like, from my estimation, I don't know what you guys gathered from the article, but these are GPS systems that like a rental car company would buy, and it's integrated into the computer systems on the vehicle, not just for tracking, but for other safety recovery. So, obviously, if someone walks with a rental car, I can track where it is. Maybe can shut the engine off, right? Or disable the fuel. Yeah.
So these are fleet management GPSs, and so for rental fleets, and also some. What do they buy here, pay here lots? Install them on the cars so that they can repossess them very easily. The problem is that, and some banks do it, by the way, not just buy here, pay. The problem here is that when you have something that can not only track the car, that's fine. That's effectively innocuous. But when you have something that can lock the brakes up, shut the engine off, do various unpleasant things through the car's a CAN bus or whatever system, OBD2 or CAN bus system, if you have people that aren't experienced in doing it safely, like wait until they get off the freeway going at 80 miles an hour before shutting their engine off and locking their brakes. Yeah. Then you have the potential for massive disaster. And that's not even hack. That's like just the bank personnel.
Yeah, these systems are all horrible. Like, you start to talk about like budget level integrations into CAN bus or ODB. Like, think of things like breathalyzers or anything that interacts with the ECU. All of these are really bad because most of these companies don't understand security, for one. For two, they're really bad at thinking through some of the security and using using web services and real-time availability to do things to this. So you've got things like cross-site scripting, OAuth, you've got authentication breakdowns. Like, all of these things, it's not just this company. I've seen this in several others that don't disclose it. But these things are running around on large fleet vehicles or in, I would say there are law enforcement or certain other fleets that leverage these type of systems and integrations.
Tyler, that's a great point, though. Is it law enforcement that installs the breathalyzer, but the breathalyzer
they do not
who installs that? And
you have to go to a third-party integrator. You pay a monthly service charge. You have to pay to get it installed. Yeah. Then you pay a monthly service charge that does the updates and passes the info back to that company who is a managed service provider.
Rip off.
And,
I'm sorry, what?
And that company charges you a fee to receive that data and then pass that on to the prosecutor's office.
They have to pass it back to the municipality where you were charged, right?
So they only pass it if there's a fail, right? Okay. And then you get charged for the failure. You get charged a service fee if you fail that or you can't pass that and it doesn't start up, or if you can't get it to start because their software and firmware is shit.
Oh, interesting.
I've never had to deal with this on my car personally, but I've had friends have this, and I want nothing more than to burn these companies to the ground. They are bad.
So what do? This device goes in the car and they plug into the OBD2 port?
Nope. They actually have to wire it into the harness, which ties into the ECU for the ignition. There's one that ties
into ECU. I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, they're hardwiring stuff.
Oh, because for the ignition, you can't do that through the ODB2.
Nope.
Right.
Well, you could, but they don't.
Depends on the car, yeah.
That's crazy. So these are similar. This must go into the wiring harness, right?
Yep. Very, very similar. Yeah, almost all of these hook into and hardwire into the system outside of the ODB. If they are using ODB, then they're hooking at the back-end port of that's directly tying to the ECU. Yeah. So, and remember, again, you look through these vulnerabilities. Yep, 12 volt. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Tyler. Nice.
No, I was just saying, if you look at all these vulnerabilities, they're stupid things, like cross-site scripting,
these
authenticated states, protocols,
default passwords, it was like
passwords,
the laundry list of.
Yeah, this is pretty common though when you have a company that says, okay, we're going to make this device, and you have a team of 3 to 5 engineers or something like that, and nobody has any kind of security background or anything. So, yeah, everything's over HTTP. I've done due diligence on several IoT vendors, where I ended up, even though we didn't buy the product, it was me having to document everything, report it back to them. Here's why you don't do this. Here's why you need to fix this. And in one case, spent 2 years, trying to get this tiny team of 5 engineers to understand why they needed to fix this, and then making sure that they actually did fix it. The really bad thing in that case was they had a server up and running where they were using the MAC address of their devices, their own devices, for authentication. And because they got all these devices created in a small batch, all the MAC addresses were more or less sequential. So you could guess and brute force the range and get all the configuration and customer information for every single one of their products, just by hitting up the server and saying, hey, here's my MAC address, here's my MAC address, here's my MAC address. So we actually wrote a Python script to do that and pulled the details of all 8,000 of their customers.
Yeah, so this is pretty similar to the first vulnerability in the BitSite report. There's a hard-coded API key. So you authenticate, it sends you back the key. The key is the same for all users. So all you have to do is replay that key, and you can sign in as any user. That's the first vulnerability.
Nissan did the same thing with the Leaf. You could download the app and plug in anybody's VIN number and then roll down their windows and unlock the doors. And like, you couldn't start the car, but you could do quite a bit just knowing somebody's VIN. Like, that was the authentication, was the VIN number, which is public.
It's the vulnerabilities are laughable, basically.
Yeah, you see it over and over and over again. It's a small engineering team, small company making a product, and they don't have anybody security minded to do the threat mapping for them.
Well, the lesson to be learned is don't be a dick if you don't have a security posture to back that up with. Like, open a bug bounty, be nice to the security researchers, and don't be a dick to your customers. Otherwise, you're going to get awesome stuff released.
Well, a lot of these things, too, are like they're bids. So they're companies that are trying to be very quick on the trigger to get bids through municipalities, and that means low bids because they usually have to take 3 bids, and so you're trying to get on the low end. You're usually in a rush, and you're trying to lock this in, and so they don't take the time to actually properly.
It's a business play, because if this were our business, right, we're going to make a GPS tracking device for fleet management. Okay. Who are the major rental companies? And you're right, they're probably going to put this out to bid because they've got how many tens of thousands or more of cars in their fleet. I want to put one of these devices in every single one. That's millions of dollars for a company that wins that bid. So let's go to market, get something as cheap as possible so we win the bid.
And the cheaper you make it, the more money you make.
Yeah, and the problem here is ignorance, though, because they've never heard of a bug bounty. They've never heard of a vulnerability disclosure plan, and they've the first time a security researcher contacts them, they're going to be deer in headlights, and they're probably going to react negatively to it. So I think the only solution here is some kind of regulation that says, hey, if you're going to create a hardware device that does this and that, you're going to have to go through some kind of certification program, to make sure that it's not full of dumb shit.
This is the one place that I do feel like regulation does make sense. Like, when you start talking about cars and you start talking about the ability to remotely lock up someone's brakes, like, that would piss me the hell off if that was my car.
But underwriting will take care of it.
Regulation.
I mean, you don't have to. I always say you don't have to have regulation if you got underwriting, because they got to have insurance for these vehicles, and if you got customers who are getting hurt or inconvenienced, even, they're going to sue you. So the underwriting may well end up taking care of some of these things, because people will have a basis for a pretty legitimate lawsuit. Right. And all of us can act as experts to testify in that case when they're filing.
The insurance companies aren't going to insure someone who has vulnerable devices that allow harm to come to people.
Right. And the insurance companies are getting there. They're starting to look at this stuff. They're starting to look at it from a cyber security perspective. And as they get there, they're going to ask those very questions when they start trying to underwrite. And they go, "You're not using these things, are you?" And people are like, "Oh yeah, we stuck those in all our cars." And they're like, "Yeah, okay, we can't give you insurance for those cars."
We need to collectively write a paper and title it "Unsafe at Any Data Rate."
There you go. Then later we can screw up a whole presidency.
Or something.
Okay, that's a little obscure reference, but I'll get my Corvair out and drive home.
You got my reference. I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to talk about the microcode decryptor that was released this week. This very much gets into my realm and my day job, right? Before we start talking about what the actual research and the attacks are, which is pretty amazing, I like to think about how do we've talked about ret bleed, right? We've talked about Spectre meltdown. In these vulnerabilities, as well as other features and other items on the processor can be fixed through microcode updates, right? This is the code running on your actual CPU. Yeah. We're kind of talking before about how does this get updated, and the answer is it depends. Like, all things that I'm finding firmware related when I ask that kind of question is Well, it depends.
Yeah.
You know, is it? And I think some of the major categories are OEM. So if it's HP or Dell, there's a more kind of logical answer, right? HP, Dell, maybe Lenovo, we can lump into that category of like they're maintaining updates to all kinds of different firmware things and components within your system. Microcode likely being one of them. Although, again, not only is it dependent on the OEM, it depends on what processor you have, depends on what firmware you have, depends on what other hardware and software is on that particular board that they put together. I do have to say, like, on a really positive note, and like the Linux person in me, like this crushes my soul, but Microsoft's hardware line, like the Surface, I have a Surface Pro 3. I hate to say this, but it's like the most secure system that I own. It's the most secure system that I own because all of the updates come from Microsoft. Yeah. I've not applied one firmware update manually to this PC.
You probably
and
can't.
I scan it like I happen to have access to enterprise level software that can find firmware vulnerabilities and all these different components at Eclipsium, and it scans completely clean. Like I'll say that in the show. This laptop scans completely clean because they roll it up. Microsoft does it.
Aren't Chromebooks the same way?
Similar. Chromebooks use Core Boot, open source UEFI firmware, as well as open source EC firmware. And I believe you're right, Adrian. Like all of those updates come from Google, who keeps that up to date. So I guess it really doesn't matter what firmware they have, like which is Google controls all of the updates, much like Microsoft does for their branded hardware.
But not only that, but you end up with some of the UEFI configurations and Intune, where you're able to do the validation of the certificates and the code signing for even secure boot, and your configuration on Intune for BitLocker, and the TPM in which the Surface Book leverages all of those pieces correlating together. That's the reason that Sean uses Surface Books too.
Microsoft has an unfair advantage because they control the CA for certificates for secure boot. They are the signing authority for secure boot. So internally, they can be like, this is great. If you're a Linux distribution, as you'll see in my article, which will hopefully be published next Tuesday, Linux distributions have to go get their software signed by Microsoft in order to participate in the secure boot process to be signed. Topic for another time. But I think, so what were you saying, Tyler? Sean Metcalf, right, likes the Surface Pro line for the same reasons I'm saying. So all those updates come from Microsoft, and it's
these devices are so secure when they're actually configured properly. You're leveraging the TPM and the way it was designed. You're leveraging, your pre-boot environment with UEFI and an Intune policy that's verifying and validating upon the boot process and all the software that even gets loaded and the update process for that software. Those can all be validated and handled via the Microsoft App Store on top of the additional security that you're getting from the hardware level. So it's like a full ecosystem of security. So yeah, from a security standpoint and a hardening standpoint, these surfaces, Microsoft has really went above and beyond from a business standpoint in your ability to handle and manage those. You can do a lot of that with other devices. This one just happens to have the full supply chain locked down and secured, and it means that it's hard to do.
The supply chain it's some muddy waters when we talk about the supply chain outside.
I think that's the secret phrase, though, that Tyler just said, which is the full supply chain. That's what makes such a difference, because you know what's there.
Remember BlackBerry?
Yes, BlackBerry, but also Apple too. I haven't kind of delved into. I think the issue with Apple is they don't force those updates on their users to update their firmware.
Their firmware and their ability to do that external management and configuration from a managed software vendor, you have to leverage things like Jamf and outside things where you're trying to integrate Active Directory. Like, there's just not a great directory services for enterprise scalability and monitoring at that level with the additional security products that Microsoft's integrating with things like ATP and Defender for Endpoint, Defender for O365, all of the suite of things that gets processed with the telemetry of Windows 10. Apple does not have that integrated with inside of their Mac OS yet. They don't have that telemetry data. They don't have the security platform. They don't have their own security product integrated to handle all of those pieces with all of the protections that Microsoft has had to get to over the last decade of lessons learned.
Yeah, it's interesting. We could do like a whole segment on, Apple controls the hardware and software with Microsoft's line of hardware, they control all the hardware and software, and the security advantages that come with it. I'd venture to guess in my Surface Pro 3, the microcode updates are all managed by Microsoft and just come down as firmware updates and a firmware subsystem, whether that's UEFI and SMM, or whether that's the equivalent of or ME, or whatever they're using to update the microcode happens in a Microsoft setting when it's their hardware and software.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are still hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that are you know, still have Mac Minis in their data centers, right? Because that's where they have to do their builds. And I think it's only recently that AWS is now offering M1 Mac instances now, so that you can actually properly do development builds in a you know, without having to use consumer hardware.
But your point is really great, Adrian, because that is, no matter what company you are, you likely have a mixed environment of some kind. You likely don't have all Microsoft software with all Microsoft laptops, or all Apple hardware with all Apple laptops once you reach a certain size. You've got development systems. You've got, in my conversations with I feel like I was talking to the podcast host of my Linux podcast, right? But they were talking about how, you know, HP has the Dev 1, and you work for an enterprise, and you're like, I want that laptop, and they're like, oh, I can't buy it because that's in the consumer line. So therefore, either it's just no, and the, you know, employee's going to go out and buy their own and use it anyway, or it's, yeah, we can do that, we just need a different purchase order, and now you've got a mixed environment where not everything is in the same ecosystem. That's where I feel like we're at today.
Yeah, I mean, you're not even
especially
in the same.
us. We're like, no, I want like this laptop. Like, I don't like my choices are this. Like, no, I want this, and I want to give a business justification for that. And if you got a business justification, they're like, okay, and that's how you end up with half. You know, I mean, maybe not half, but like different user populations on different hardware and software.
But even if you're pretty strict, you may still end up with different generations of hardware in the same series of laptops. I've seen that come in. We bought like a whole stack of Dells once, and, you know, half of them were not on this version of the firmware, and you know, and trying to manage that when they've been distributed is really challenging.
Yeah, because it depends on what CPU you have determines some of the capabilities and what management software. If it's vPro or not, vPro determines if you get the active management technology or just ME by itself without the active. That's some of my research now for my next blog post, right? Is what processor you have dictate in which laptop you have with what feature set dictates the vulnerabilities and the remediation for that system.
That's also how you get ants.
This is how we get ants. All that alphabet soup spilling on the floor is going to dry up and get eaten by ants.
All Archer references are appreciated.
Yes, yes.
Do you want ants? Because that's how you get ants.
Well, hold on. So for Apple, I'm not sure of how they're doing microcode updates because I haven't looked into it yet, right? We've kind of established that Microsoft's hardware, and, you know, obviously their software line does that. You start stepping outside of that, whose responsibility is it for microcode updates to come through? And how do those get applied? And then how do you validate those is really my question. The answer is it depends, right?
It does depend.
This is where Eclipsium has the market edge. Like I know your day job, you're trying not to tout too much, but honestly, there's not another vendor out there that handles and does what Eclipsium does, and it is such an important space where we're gonna have to start seeing these, you know, certified by Eclipsium or hardware that gets certified at the OEM prior to deployment or ongoing deployment and validation as it goes through, because otherwise there's no way to know that microcode is safe. There's no way to know whether it's being updated. Most places don't have a system or a process in place that looks at things at the hypervisor or bare metal layers to keep it updated. They're barely managing a vulnerability process for their virtual devices. So when we start talking about all these physical and hardware devices, and then you start to think about all of the network gear, the interactions between SAN appliances or application devices, load balancers, all of the different aspects and pieces it takes to run an enterprise, and the hardware levels and firmware and microcode that's getting applied and updated on all those. No one's managing all of that, and there's no one actually evaluating that.
But I think the keywords there are management and process, right? So I think the supply chain and the bill of materials on that system is one thing. For me, the real big issue is, what's the process for keeping that update ongoing? Like, okay, I'm going to buy this piece of hardware and it's going to come with some software. I mean, if you're buying the latest and greatest hardware and software, I'm less concerned about like the time I buy it and initially deploy it, that it's going to be vulnerable to something, right? But what's going to happen is there's going to be a presentation at Black Hat. Someone's going to publish some research that's going to force me to want to upgrade. I mean, not force me to upgrade, but forced now I have a vulnerability and I have to make a decision. Now I may have to go back to the OEM, software, hardware providers of different types, depending on the situation, to go, how do I get this update applied? Whose responsibility? It's like a hot potato at that point in a lot of circumstances. How do I get this updated? Does it come from Microsoft? Does it come from HP? Is HP waiting on a third party that developed this subsystem to provide? They're waiting on Intel to provide the update that has to roll up to HP, that has to go into my man. So it's the ongoing supply chain management that is my greatest concern right now, especially observing what I've observed in the past month, right?
Not to mention when things just a few. I mean, not like you said, not many companies are homogeneous. They have a long range, of current cutting edge products, but then we didn't upgrade the marketing department this year, and they're a generation back, and so on. And so I think that just turns into you may not even get an update. The company may never release a patch for a vulnerability if it's a little bit older. So you're going to have some kind of rolling documentation of where everybody is, and then see where do I need to risk manage on those other machines that I can't patch. I mean, you can't always patch firmware.
But it's interesting in a lot of circumstances. Like, we talk about applying these microcode. We haven't actually talked about the research yet, but we talk about applying microcode updates, which is important for this research that just came out like yesterday or the day before. Important because of Ret Bleed, which came out, I believe, like last week, right? Yeah. And so we see these like new trends of being able to update it, and you've got to make decisions. So the concerning point for me is you're going to make decisions about what you want. So if you want more manageability, that means you're going to need more features in your hardware and software. More features mean more attack surface. In other words, as an enterprise, I may go, I want HP laptops, and they all have to be vPro enabled so I get the management. But that means you've got a slightly larger attack surface because you have AMT or Intel's active management technology now on there, which puts something in your net actually outside of your operating system's network stack to allow you to manage and rebuild those systems.
Whereas if you go no features, you end up with a thing where you literally contact your employees and say, please bring your laptop by IT, where we're going to update it.
Or no features, like on the consumer side, may be like my laptop, the last EFI BIOS firmware update, 2019.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the last one, and that's it. Because it's not an enterprise level system. And I'm like, really? Like, the laptop's only like 2 years old, like 2-3 years old. Like, now I got to get a new system?
Planned obsolescence.
Yep.
Pretty much.
That's motherboards are the same way. I mean, they, after the next gen comes out, they stop updating that stuff. So good luck.
Yeah.
So quick plug for enterprise security. God damn it! I'm going to change out this camera before tomorrow. So quick plug for Enterprise Security Weekly. We have SIC codes coming on, SICK codes, not the other SIC codes. And he's going to be talking about the research work he's done on John Deere's. And same situation there, where John Deere is basically saying, you don't own this tractor, you're licensing it for a limited time. And when we decide that this tractor's done, it's done, and you got to buy a new one. Or a new license, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's I mean, in some cases, I wish I had that option. Like, I wish I could go back to, in my case, MSI, and go like, no, like I'd pay for updates for some of that.
Well, yeah, that could be almost a business model too, or where it's like, your laptop, how often you really need new hardware. I mean, we've seen a slowing down of hardware development. So maybe they just add features over time and you relicense, and they say, okay, we're gonna put new microcode out, and you can upgrade your
but
firmware.
You got to balance that with like, maybe I'll just go buy a new laptop as well.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if the hardware and everything ends up costing you $1,000 and they price the licenses properly, and you say, well, you could just keep upgrading this thing, then you get a whole new.
It's almost like an extension. It's why I like open source. Open source for that. Maybe there's a company that will charge you for services for open source software that will continue the maintenance of your firmware on that particular device, because your operating system software is going to stay updated. Yeah. Yes, Josh.
The John Deere's actually in that story. The farmers now use Ukrainian firmware for their tractors. And not a joke. And so they had a team of Ukrainians that built firmware for John Deere tractors.
Yeah, there you go.
The farmers downloaded it, ran it on their tractors, and now they own their tractors. And John Deere was suing a whole group of them, I think, for doing that. Now, I don't know where that lawsuit went to. Tyler,
there's a lot of underground flashing and management of tractors because of this. And honestly, the companies that do this try to fly under the radar quite heavily, because John Deere is very happy because it messes up their whole subscription model they're trying to apply to hardware, which is nothing new. You look at things like Meraki and their firmware license, or Cisco, any of the firewall devices for next gen stuff, it all on subscription based.
Even cars now. I saw a car the other day that you could buy the car. You could activate features on the fly, like to heat the seat heaters. Like the seat heaters didn't work in the car.
BMW. We covered that last week on ESW. It was BMW. $18 a month.
Yeah,
to have seat
and it was like in-game purchase. You're like driving the highway, and the car detects it's freezing and goes, "Hey, is your ass cold? Would you like an upgrade? Click here."
Yeah, all that's going to lead to is a whole secondary market.
Well, it gets better. Tesla. There was a Tesla car that was bought new and had various features that were paid for. Then the guy said, the owner of the car said, I'm done with it. I want to sell it. So he sold it.
Non-transferable?
He sold it through a dealership, and Tesla revoked some of the pieces that he had bought. The software upgrades.
Yeah, the autonomous driving, is like an extra $8,000 or $10,000 package or something like that on Teslas.
And it's non-transferable.
So you're
across
licensing it, and that's a non-transferable license.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's nuts.
I did want to dig into microcode decryptor because I think it represents some really groundbreaking research from PT Security are the ones that broke this. And I encourage our audience to dig into. So you click My Story number 7, takes you to a GitHub repository. There's also in there, to get in-depth information about this, the researchers did a talk at OffensiveCon 22, and they linked to a YouTube video, an hour-long presentation where they go into excruciating detail of exactly how they did this. My understanding of this is somewhat limited. I spent some time talking about this with my coworkers, but not a whole ton. Is that these researchers that basically found the microcode, were able to decrypt the microcode firmware, did so by finding an undocumented debug in one particular chipset. I think it was an Intel Atom chipset. Right? And they were able to enable debug mode. Debug mode then gave them access to the entire firmware stack, including the private key that was used to sign future firmware updates. So once you have, so the way I've understood it's been explained to me, once you have, in this sense, one example of this, I've got a version of Intel microcode from this processor, I've derived this key, you can start reverse engineering from here. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. Now, I want to cover some of the points in the FAQ because I think it's a good service for our audience. Of course, you can go read it, but it kind of begs the obvious questions. So does this mean I can make my own microcode update? No, only decryption is supported because microcode has an RSA signature for integrity protection. So this is all protected in the TPM, right, Tyler? I think as we the TPM
That's where it
and
gets checked.
or also the TXE prevents certain firmware from being updated by storing those keys securely. That's the purpose of
what checks the
key.
TPM
and the TXE, correct?
Yeah. That process happens between the TPM, the SMM, and in some cases the BMC or the Intel ME. Those all come into play as UFEI begins its boot process, and you're leveraging secure boot and validating and verifying the integrity and signing certs of that startup process and the code that's being ran from the CPU for that boot process to happen.
Right. You don't want anyone to be able to update code that's running on your CPU. And there's protections in place for that at a very high level, right? It's basically
that would be bad.
It's a very high level. That's the gist of it, right? ME and BMC are interesting in this context because those are separate subsystems, in fact, separate microprocessors and microkernels running on those microprocessors that have direct hardware access to everything on your computer, including your CPU, making it, in some cases, the logical place to put these microcode updates, because there's also a TPM and validation involved in those subsystems as well. Although some of it protects it in like either direction. So like the SMM can't affect code in ME because it's a separate subsystem, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and then a lot of that code and firmware is managed or updated as a different process. The OEM may control a piece of that code on the BMC, but may not control any of the signing certs or update process for the firmware or the Intel ME, right? You may be dealing with like an HP ILO or a Dell DRAC, where the BMC is separate, and that firmware that integrates and controls different portions of that hardware interaction and capability are separately updated and may be monitored and managed at different time intervals, and may not even get those updates. They may end of life because they don't have support for them. I
thought it was interesting because like you have to extract the keys in order to get access to the microcode. Is that correct? Did I state that correctly?
I believe so.
So the FAQ, how did you extract the keys, they ask, and it says using vulnerabilities in Intel TXE, which is the trusted execution environment. We had activated undocumented debugging mode called red unlock and extracted dumps of microcode directly from the CPU. Inside of that, they found the keys in the algorithm inside.
So in order to initiate,
you can't just access the microcode without the key, unless you have debug mode, which gives you access to the microcode firmware in addition to the keys. Is kind of the way I read it.
Yeah, there's security portions of instruction sets on the CPU, and that initiation of the CPU and the code that gets loaded for execution is typically encrypted, and there's security controls in place on the CPU itself in order to protect that memory space and the execution happening within inside of it. And so by activating the debug mode and some of the areas that they were able to access via that interaction on that debug, that allows them to view protected regions that may otherwise be obscured or obfuscated from any hardware interaction.
So it's worth mentioning some context here that the CPUs that this works for are, I'm guessing, largely in Chromebooks or in embedded applications.
Yeah,
these are Atoms and Celerons.
Yep.
Like every single CPU on the list of supported CPUs maxes out at 8 gigs of RAM. Yeah. That's the most RAM.
These are smaller. A great point, Adrian. These are smaller embedded processors, which I'm imagining maybe had a different debugging system for these processors that they were able to leverage, and the debugging process for other processors might have been different. They don't have an exploit, for that to be able to unlock this particular firmware.
Yeah, you're not going to find any SGX or vPro or anything like that on these. These aren't enterprise products.
Correct. For that, I mean, there's been I'm researching all of the research that went into Intel ME. There's a lot of interesting research on that. 2017 was like the year of, Intel ME vulnerabilities and presentations. So it's really super interesting stuff.
I take that back. Some of them do support SGX, but just like the very most recent Gemini Lake ones.
The Twitter thread was interesting. This is how closely I follow the players in this space. That's how closely I follow it. And so one of the PT security researchers tweeted this out. Someone else that worked for Intel on the SGX team was like, hey, dude, like, nice job. And then has, like, other comments in here that are lost now, like, about this researcher. Like, I don't work for Intel anymore, but, like, we never, like, he basically said the gist of his other comment was, we never designed this in a bubble as if no one would have ever had access to this. Like, we design protections with the thought in mind that someone's eventually going to crack this, so we need to make it secure enough to be resilient, even if someone were to get access to the code. We didn't just go design it in a bubble. Interesting. Richard Hughes, of the founder of the LVFS Linux vendor firmware service project, is speculating, like, can we build checks now for microcode updates, since this microcode has been decrypted into some of the LVFS checking, which is a firmware checking service provided by LVFS in Linux-based systems. You'll see examples of that on my blog post that should drop next week.
Yeah, I mean, and you also think about a lot of the security protections and additional controls that get deployed as part of, like, server processors or things like vPros. These are an entirely different set and have additional controls and security modules in place because of the grade that they're and the hardware that they're protecting and being utilized on. So when you look at this list, and this is really cool research, but this is also not something that's going to be leveraged against a hypervisor or bare metal platform in a cloud provider.
Yeah, we were talking about that. You mentioned vPro, right? And as I unpack vPro, it's really just applications inside of the ME firmware that implement active management technology, or AMT, from Intel. And I was like, well, like, what prevents you from just taking some AMT firmware and putting it on your ME system that didn't have AMT? Because, like, my consumer-based computers don't have vPro, therefore they don't have the active management technology. I'm like, well, what if I could enable that? Like, that'd be a cool backdoor. But, like, there's other checks that I haven't fully unpacked. Like, there's other validation steps that Intel has built into the process. I believe primarily for their own reasons of they don't want a non-vPro system to be able to just, I can update firmware, make it a vPro system without paying the extra money or whatever it is, right? Like,
and also it's just a hardware issue too. I mean,
it could be chipset related.
If you have users start pushing stuff onto devices, interesting problems ensue. But they'd also want to be sure you're paying for what you're supposed to be paying.
Correct,
for.
And that's why some of those checks.
And so they put a lot of checks and balances in there.
What's interesting is my other post I'm working on. So I'm working on these two posts. One is almost completed. The other one is about Intel ME. And when you look at the ME cleaner, so, like, the Linux community is like, there's this microprocessor that's running this code on all these systems, and it's proprietary code, and we don't have access to it. So, of course, Linux community is like, oh my God, the sky is falling. This is horrible. Yeah. Like, all right, well, like, we're stuck with it. Okay, I get that. But ME cleaner actually modifies the firmware that you pull off of your ME chip and removes functionality and then puts back a trimmed down version of it. So, like, you can't add stuff to it necessarily,
you can take stuff away.
But you can take stuff away.
Yeah.
But don't be like, Paul said that in the show, so I'm going to go try this on my system. Like, no.
Don't do this at home.
Huge disclaimer, like, do not try this at home. Like, it might work for you, but it might
also
not.
Might brick it forever.
Again, we talked about how there's different firmware with different hardware and different operating system and different like, there's a lot of variables at play here. And when you read all these articles like I did, you read users' experiences that are like, like, this worked for me, but it didn't work for this person. So, like, if you go mucking around with this stuff and you'd be like, I want to remove ME from my system, and Paul said to use ME cleaner, and I'm just going to run it. Don't do that.
Yeah,
I'm telling you right now, don't do that.
This is Workbench only. I mean, without a doubt. Anything that involves chips firmware, always just Workbench only, and assume you're going to destroy it. I mean, that's been since the dawn of time. We only ever fiddled with stuff that I was like, I can live without this because
pulling stuff off is one thing.
Pulling it off, looking at it's one thing, but messing with it's another whole thing.
You want to start writing new stuff to your
done.
Yeah, it's bad. It could be bad.
That was my first PC lesson. Was I was trying to do something.
Because you're writing to the SPI flash chip.
Yeah.
The SPI flash chip also has your UEFI BIOS on it. It's just in a protected region.
And if you think flashing the BIOS is scary, wait till you start doing that kind of stuff, because all it takes is the tiniest little glitch and the whole thing's going to crash and it's going to be done, and you just throw it away and get another one.
Yeah, earlier versions of ME Cleaner didn't figure out how to put the firmware back well enough to get around the anti-theft that Intel had for a while. So your system would boot and everything would be fine for 30 minutes. Yeah. After 30 minutes, your computer would shut off.
Well, my advice to you, if you want to use ME Cleaner, any of that kind of stuff, is get old systems that you don't care about, and put it on the workbench and experiment, and document how often you fail and how often you succeed, and don't ever use it on something you want to keep, because you're probably going to regret it.
But now the only way to get this stuff off, and Tyler, this is a question for you and anyone else too, but you need a SPI programmer, because you have to put a clip onto the chip and pull the firmware off.
You do.
What is everyone's favorite hardware device for doing it? Is it a good FET? Will do it, right? It's got the functionality.
There's a couple. The Shikra is one. The Great FET is probably the newest iteration.
Great FET, right?
Great FET's the one that we used to have that we were playing with, and we had another thing that was just like a twister box.
Great FET does like JTAG and a bunch of other stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had the Bus Pirate. The Bus Pirate was kind of the de facto, but there's always firmware issues, software issues. A JTagulator, if you're leveraging some of the JTag stuff, you can leverage that. The Great FET's probably the most common, but SPI and the ability to interact with that chip, depending on if it's a ball socket, how small those are, if you're able to actually get a connection to the SPI, whether those are exposed, whether there's a security bit on that you can turn up or turn down. All of those things are part of the spec on the chip that may or may not be public and may take a lot of effort in order to dump, and whether or not you even get a clean dump off of that because of interference and specialized software and hardware it takes to actually do that. That's why those of us that do the hardware hacking and kind of get into that chip and firmware dumping, it gets very expensive when you need very specific pieces of software and hardware to interact with different kinds of chips, and each of those is different and costs money to actually acquire.
I will leave us with this on this topic, which was a very popular tweet I put out today that just happened to really take off. And the quote that I stole from somewhere else on the internet, it was like a comment thread on a blog post, on page 2, and the quote was, "Firmware is just software that's inconvenient to program."
There you go.
People loved it because they were like, "Oh my god, I so relate to that."
I think right? 100%. Yeah, because it really is just software.
It is.
It's just
really close to the hardware, making
it's
it
really close to the hardware,
right?
And it's really dangerous software. It's really dangerous to mess with, but it really is just software in the end.
Adrian, sorry, did you have a comment in there?
I was just with the pulling data off of chips and SPI. Like we saw that story a while back. It was actually a guy local to here. How the chips are implemented on the boards really matters also. Because they found a convenient place to just clip onto and pull passwords off of the TPM when when the password was on its way to the CPU from the TPM. The way the board was designed made it convenient to do so. And
Oh, somewhat hardware related too. We touched on this earlier. The new air gap attack that uses SATA cables as antennas to transfer radio signals. So this is interesting.
And for those of you on the rest of the coast, the SATA cables are what he is referring to.
Is it SATA or SATA?
I'm going to say SATA, but
it's no. But serial ATA.
Yeah, serial ATA.
So it would be SATA if you were to SATA. Is it potato?
SATA.
It's
SATA.
Is it Damon
it's
or
definitely
demon?
potato.
Is it tomato?
I'll be in Scotland before you.
We cannot rely on our Boston fellows here for this kind of discussion.
Is that an East Coast West Coast thing? SATA and SATA?
100%. It has definitely been SATA.
Is that because we say Pak the car, so it's SATA?
And potato and tomato market. Yeah, those are potatoes and tomatoes in the market. Yes.
So here at SATA, out in Idaho,
I heard a guy in Boston the other night yelling, "Shove your SATA up your ass!"
It sounds better than shove your SATA up your ass.
Is it an AT-AT or an 8.8?
Yeah, is it an 8.8? Come on.
Oh my
anyway, 6 gigahertz spectrum is what we're working with now on SATA connections that are used as an antenna to transmit data. So the software they can put on the target machine that will then use this covert channel. Is it a covert channel? Covert channel may not be the...
Is this these Israeli guys again?
It's a SATA cable, man. It's a covert channel.
Yeah, it's Dr. Geary. It's Dr. Geary. This guy's awesome.
Oh, so you know
this is as covert as it gets.
No, I mean these guys do this stuff all the time. They do all these kind of crazy experiments like this.
You have to ask why they do this and where they're utilizing this at.
Well, yeah, it's not really. I don't think it's like practical. It's just like lab fun.
This is a way to publish papers.
Well, yeah, and that's cool.
And get everyone talking about it.
And we're reading the papers, so they're obviously worthwhile,
right?
Till they disappear and Musada's picked them up and they're being leveraged for things.
Where this has the most value are tech thriller authors.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because this is going to be the whole MacGuffin, right? It's like this is how you got all the data out of the CIA or something.
But even when you look at things like Stuxnet, and we know from doing the show and reading all these papers that. And I even think they call it out in this article, like they kind of run through the history of these covert channels, which I believe is the right
term. I agree with that.
They talk about, where is it? They talk about it in here, like some of the different ways in which you can transfer data in these type of covert channles, right? We've talked about fans. Alternating
blinking the hard drive lights,
oscillating lights,
right? Like the whole. I mean, there's a whole gamut of things.
And
you look at Stuxnet though, and you fall back to the good old fashioned social engineering, and you're aka your insider, right? Where you're convincing someone who has physical access to implant some software, even if it's unbeknownst to them, right? So it's social engineering.
Outside of James Bond, it's so much easier to do that kind of stuff than it's ever going to be to do these, Mission Impossible James Bond kind of tricks.
This is a $5 wrench situation right here.
Yeah.
This is the Hollywood hack versus the $5 wrench.
Yeah. And I mean, why wouldn't you just social engineer it? I mean, this may not even work, and it's so slow, and it's going to take forever. And I mean, it's cool. I mean, I love this. Cool. I love this research. I enjoy reading it. Please keep doing it, Dr. Geary. But I mean, in terms of practical assault or pen testing, I just don't think it's or exfiltration. I just don't think it's viable.
Here it is. So are these all his other research?
Yeah, he did all these things.
Brightness was the LCD screen brightness. Power supply was the power supply unit. AirFi, Wi-Fi signals, LAN antenna over Ethernet cables. Yeah. I mean, it's all this very esoteric stuff that's probably not very practical, but that's fine. That's what academic research is for. I mean, you can do all kinds of stuff, whatever interests you, and it's great to read about. And that doesn't mean it's not a vector. It just means that as a risk assessment, you go, yeah, the likelihood of this is incredibly low right now.
Yeah, but
I feel like with the number of these types of covert channels or side channel attacks, if you will, maybe one of them has legs, right?
Which is
why I think, kind of to your point, right? Like why this research
is important. That's what basic research is. Yeah. He's just
explore all these, explore
and
maybe one of these is actually reliable.
And then he finds like something horrible, like Vanik phreaking or something that was like this.
What I've seen is like he publishes one, let's just say it's the LED thing, and then there's some other advancement or other research that rides on top of that, and all of a sudden that emerges, and we see that in the wild, and we're like, holy crap, we thought we would never see this in the wild, but here it is because, researcher A did the original one, researcher B built upon it, and then attackers took it yet to the next level and actually made it practical.
Yep. So that's how research works.
I haven't seen it in the covert channel space necessarily. I could be proven wrong, but I've seen it in other areas.
But like you say, he's casting his nets, and he may find the one thing, or he may just set the stage for
why
other
it's
people.
important to do this research.
No,
so
it is.
we're not completely in the dark about it, right? I'm not saying you need to go stop everything and go, oh my God, we need to put some shielding around all our SATA cables.
Yeah, I mean,
all of our machines need to be upgraded to use NVMe because it doesn't use SATA cables.
That's why I wrap all my drive cables in aluminum foil.
No. The proper response to this is to start a company that sells side channel resistant
shielded cables.
SATA cables.
I'm licensing it as we speak. It's like,
there just needs to be like a whole shield that goes over your.
I'm just going to dip them in epoxy and say that that's good.
But you need like
you could call the company Monster Cables or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
I'm going to call it Wrap Your Junk.
No, that was
wrap your SATA.
Wrap your SATA, your SATA.
I had to take a shot at Monster because they're the ones who sell like $1,000 HDMI cables, right?
Tipped. Yeah, it's like.
I mean, shielding is important in cables, but only to a certain.
A certain point.
There's a physics.
Right.
There's physics.
Yeah. And I mean, and so this is not. I mean, I do think that it's good we bring this up because people should be careful about reading these kind of things and overreacting.
Right.
And you should be ready to deal with questions from upper management or people that come in, because I've had these kind of questions before where some CEO or even a CIO read an article like this in some magazine and said, is this a problem? I mean, are we going to have an issue with this? We need to be wrapping all the cables in our whole company in like Faraday cages and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, yeah, no, not really. It's very esoteric, but it's interesting. And please, Dr. Gary, keep doing it. It's so
Please Faraday your cables, yo.
I mean, the flip side to this is that air gaps aren't, don't protect you from everything, which is important to remember.
And they can hang Tom Cruise from a cable maybe and lower him down into.
Sure. I mean, all that is feasible.
SEAL team, the SEAL team comes in and they,
Yes. Crack in the Linux firewall.
I saw that.
This was a wholly technical post, Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, this doesn't ease you into it. This isn't. It's not mincing words, man.
Blammo.
It's just like
stick your head in the fire hose.
Like maybe 2 sentences and then screenshots of like in-depth C code.
No, they've got a struct in the first. I mean, this first paragraph's got a struct. I was like, and I love structs. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm like,
who doesn't love a good struct?
I mean, man, I sit around at night dreaming up structs, but I mean, you didn't even get to the first header and you got a struct on the screen.
It's a header file. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, this is gonna be a good one.
And it's a really long article too. Like, I mean, I did not digest the whole thing. I have to go back and read this. Like, I saw this and I flagged it and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I mean, basically the summary for this one, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the article, this is what you need to know. Go back and kind of deconstruct the article. To sum it up, he said, I found a heap buffer overflow within the net filter subsystem of the Linux kernel. This vulnerability could be exploited to get a privilege escalation on Ubuntu 22.04, which is the latest version of Ubuntu. The source code of the exploit is available on GitHub, so you can go play with the exploit. Which is
privilege
awesome.
Escalation, though. So this is a buffer overflow that you have to use. You have to exploit as a local user on that Ubuntu machine.
I think
that's
so,
how he termed it.
So I think you had to have at least local user privilege on the machine.
Weird comparison that does not fully protect a
you're
copy. You're
attacking the firewall from the inside?
Yeah.
That seems odd.
Yeah, I don't know that he said it's a heap buffer overflow exploited to gain root privileges on 22.04. I'm not sure how, like, when I saw that it was in the firewall, I would expect it to be a remote. I construct packets of a certain type that hit a certain rule.
Because that could be scary because Linux firewalls, NetFilter is embedded in a lot of crazy places. Several places in the cloud, I would venture to guess.
But doesn't this give you an escalation, though? So you're a local user and you can escalate and get more privileges.
I know you got to go through the whole post, which again, like, there's no warm up. It kind of jumps right into source code, which I mean, is awesome.
Where's the?
Yeah, it says there's a good write primitive is needed to perform a privilege escalation, and then there's another article that says here's a way to exploit this with a new write primitive that will unlink this. Yeah, so you can escalate.
Hacking the actual net filter process. This attack isn't coming over the network.
No. This is internal, so you'd have to actually be on the device.
It is reported as CVE 2022-34918. They proposed a patch, and it has been released in the upstream tree, and he points to the commit. This would be in NetFilter, which is off of the Linux kernel source code tree.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have decided I hate the title of this post because a crack in the Linux firewall, like I'd immediately assume that this is going to be a network-based attack.
It's not really a crack in the firewall as much as a crack in the system. Which is very different to me because I agree with Adrian. It's like a crack in the firewall implies that somebody gets through the firewall, but that's not what's happening. It's a crack in the system that's running the firewall, so you could escalate on that system, and it means it's a threat, but it's also not like, oh, geez, it's a remote, yeah.
Yeah.
Tyler, I didn't dig into this article, but one of the Microsoft ones that I found was Microsoft Windows Network File System v4 Remote Code Execution Vulnerability. This is from Trend Micro. Remote code execution exists in the Windows Network File System. Improper handling of NFS v4 requests. Did you see this one?
Yeah, it's another one that's gonna kind of carry on and be very interesting. I'm curious to see how they patch this one because it is remote code execution, and NFS across Windows networks is leveraged via RPC, and the RPC stack is open and available in most corporate environments. So,
and is this
one
compatibility and interoperability with Unix and Linux NFS file systems?
Well, they have to be able to leverage NFS for their uses of file systems across the network that interop with things like Linux or NetApps or things like that. So yeah, this falls into that, but Microsoft has their version of NFS that they've been leveraging for quite a while. So it's nothing new that we haven't seen, but they're having to patch this because of the way the RPC calls are handled on the server side of it. So
interesting, Tyler. I didn't ask you about this, and I want everyone else's opinion too. I was looking for a network attached storage for the studio, right? I cobbled together just basically a Linux Samba file share to get us through for now to serve as a backup that I had already implemented. I just needed to update the software on and make it available. And I did that, and then I saw Robert Graham's post. Yeah, Rob's post. Did you see that, Adrian?
Yeah, I saw that you posted that.
Yeah, and he put together, I imagine that, Rob did a ton of research before he put this post together.
And I had not capable of doing anything any other way. Okay?
I had just done, a little research, and, based on my experiences, and I want to get everyone's kind of take on this, is that Drobo is highly unreliable. I had 2 catastrophic failures, and I discounted them as a platform. QNAP has had so many serious vulnerabilities that I would discount them as a
ransomware all over the people getting ransomed left and right on their QNAPs.
It could be a great
and Synology.
So Synology is where I went. So what is your thoughts on Synology in this mix?
Same thing. QNAP and Synology, the back-end platform and the vulnerabilities are pretty close. There's been more ransomware focused on QNAP, but that's because QNAP had some interesting ways in which they were exposing some of their stuff directly to the internet. In all of these cases, SMB NAS systems should never be exposed to the internet, and they should probably be on what's considered a storage and management network on top of that. So I always go back to corporate NAS systems like TrueNAS, because you're going to be leveraging things like iSCSI, or you're going to be using, SSD pre-caching or storage forwarding and caching. You have to leverage things that match your performance and needs, but then you want security on top of that. And these SMB ones are never going to provide the security you need for the data that any of us are going to be putting on them.
So is iSCSI a better option? So I can have multiple Windows computers, Mac computers on the network, all with iSCSI supported on them, accessing the same drive?
iSCSI is just a protocol that you can leverage to do interesting things. Like you can bond and pair together iSCSI LUNs and have the ability to attach those LUNs to different Windows services that have a direct driver integration, and that provides, in some cases, good throughput depending on the technology and how you're leveraging that. You can also mesh yourself up with, fiber iSCSI LUNs and not having those bonded or paired right, and having a network in which you don't have an LACP trunk and you're trying to pass all that traffic across a non-redundant network. You end up with huge bottlenecks that you don't even know why are happening. So planning that out properly and knowing how storage works.
Software-defined SCSI, right?
Yeah, it really is, and it allows some interesting things, again, with the LUNs and the ability to do that direct driver interaction and attachment, but there's a lot to storage now if you want to do storage right. That's why a lot of these things like Drobo, Synology, and the others have taken off, because it's easy. You plug and play, but that doesn't really provide you. You're not even talking at the hardware level. You're not talking about caching. You're not talking about the memory and overhead on the processor. You're not even talking about the drives in which you're using and the RAID level that can interact for whichever protocol you're going to pass the connections to. And then you've got to start talking about the security layer on top of each one of those as different components. Like, there's quite a bit to doing good storage.
Storage is one of those easy things to start doing, but it's very hard to do correctly.
And easy to screw up.
And because it gets bigger, so you get these exponential effects. So like Tyler was saying about these caching and these bottlenecks that you get on pipes, if you don't know what you're doing, you can just, and believe me, I don't know what I'm doing, and I built some really, really nasty storage before.
You start to get into like search indexes, and you cascade and overload a search index because you got those set up wrong. You've got your memory allocation wrong with the protocol that doesn't match up.
It's the reason that you bought a Synology or a QNAP or a Drobo in the first place.
or any of those. Yeah,
you don't want to have to think about any of that stuff.
But that's why those cost so much too. If you look at some of those,
how well your webcam autofocuses. I don't want to have to think about this.
Yeah, some of the reason these small NASs actually took off, and some of the reason they're used so heavily is because of their additional feature sets, which are the things that also introduce bad security. You've got things like OpenVPN on there with VirtualBox, with the ability to do Docker containers, as well as have a music Plex server on there in India and LA.
Right? Yeah, they're like the WordPress of storage devices. To me, as long as you don't add Ken's photo slideshow plugin, right?
Yeah, but I love that analogy. But it seems to me in the NAS world, it's on the SMB side, you don't get those choices. Like, I have to get the equivalent of WordPress with every single plugin installed. Like, what I want is not necessarily enterprise level storage, but I don't want the SMB that bundles all the crap with it. I want to be able to like choose. Like, I want my bare bones NAS device. I want to check the box and go, in the firmware, I only want like SMB.
I've built tons of these things with the low end stuff. I mean, with the WordPresses, with the QNAS, the QSANs, and the TerraMasters, and all these different there's another one called RAID Master or something like that. And I
thought that was your handle, like Raidmaster 67.
That was a different kind of raid.
But I mean, I built those things. They were not for heavy production, high targets.
Yeah.
But they were for big storage problems. And when I built them, I isolated the hell out of them. I mean, and so they are in their own networks. They have their own management networks, their own.
But that's hard because computers need access to them.
Well, these were not. Yeah, these were not like letting desktop users store files on them and things like that. These were for storing things that would be distributed in other ways.
Yeah.
And so they were attached to VMware. They were attached to things like that. And by isolating them, all these, when I saw I have a QSAN, and I had all these threats for this QSAN, and I'm like, yeah, but nobody can get to that QSAN. I mean,
I don't have to worry about that.
Right. So
that's attached to an isolated VM, or it's attached to an isolated.
It's on its own VLAN. The only way you can get to it is by going through another mechanism, and it's just in a private network anyway. It's not exposed to the internet. So the threats from the QSAN stuff didn't really faze me. Yeah, I patched it, but I mean, I wasn't sitting there going, "Oh my God, we're screwed."
But if I own root level access on a system that's connected to it. I have access to the data anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but it's all about the application and where you're using it and how you're using it. And so if you need to allow thousands of users access to these things, it can be a real problem. Or if you need internet access to them, yeah, it can be a real problem.
Right.
And then you may need to up your game and go into a more heavily engineered solution, and that's going to cost you a lot more money. So if I build something for $10,000, if you go into a heavily engineered, heavily secured solution, it may cost you $100,000 for the same amount of storage or more. And yeah, it'll work better, but it just all depends on what you need to do with it.
Rob puts it very well. Like he says, there's lots of do-it-yourself solutions. You can build your own Linux systems to do this, but it's like I want something that just works without hassles. Like he's like, I know a drive is going to fail, and I want to be able to remove that drive and put a new one in, and not worry about it from there. And like, I get that, right? Like,
I mean, I have a like 20 terabyte array that has been running since 2008.
Really?
And I've replaced 2 drives, and it was built completely with low end stuff. It's not enterprise even level drives. It's like literally like consumer level drive, and the thing just sits there and runs. It's running right now, and it's got tons of stuff stored on it, but it's not accessed by people. It's like slow storage, glacier storage, whatever you want to call it, for stuff at the university where people say, I have all these videos and I like to save them in a nice secure place. And I'm like, okay, I'll move them over. They don't get to touch it. I do it. I move it. So there's no threat from it. There's no risk from it. Now, would that work if I needed 500 people to be able to access this thing on the fly? No, it wouldn't. It would be terrible for that.
I need like a network storage cache, right? Because like when you're producing audio and video that needs to flow through a workflow, like I need
automatically.
Like
so TrueNAS may or may not do that?
TrueNAS, interesting. So like here's the use case. In most podcasts and video in studios have this. Like I need to record on one system. I need to move that off and move it to a NAS or somewhere where someone can pull it down and edit it really quick and then publish it. And then like if it goes away after that, like it's totally fine.
Okay.
So it needs to live for like a week.
So all these low-end solutions are perfect for that.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is the reliability of some of the low-end solutions.
No.
I don't want to be...
They're reliable.
Drobo is not reliable.
Well,
you got RAID 50 going in most of these.
Slap RAID 6 on there, and you got 24 drives, and I'm telling you, I've built a ton of these things, and they last forever because they're just low-end. But they're for what you're talking about. They're not for some massive production system with thousands of users accessing it.
Right.
It's on a private network.
You can also integrate 10 gig NICs into all of these for very, very low cost with a 10 gig switch on a private network.
You'd want to do that. So you put 10 gig NICs, you put it...
And that's the one great application for 10. You got to
we built 10 gig NIC on there with fiber risers, and basically it's fine. We can blow stuff on there, pull stuff off there when we need to do that, and it's fairly cheap because I don't have to pay for the electrical.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, once you put a bunch of spinners in there and they're spinning 24 hours a day, they do get...
it draws.
I don't have to pay for that, so I just, got a nice little outlet there in school. Nobody knows about it. I think it's in the marketing department. I just plug it in with an extension cord.
It's in the marketing... authentication risk discovered in the Okta platform. This was interesting. This came from Threat Post, right? But you got to read the original research from a company called Optimize. Have you heard of this company before, Adrian?
Optimize.
Authamize. AUTHOMIZE.
Which story is this?
I have not heard of this company.
This is my story number 9.
Okay, I'm just trying to find it.
Authamize does something in like the authentication.
This is the Okta post?
This is the Okta story. Yeah.
Is it
I thought there was something around this, like it was not a legit thing, and there was reasons why, but no one fully walked it through.
There's a lot of controversy, potential controversy, I should say, about this, where this is your classic case of security researchers find what they call vulnerabilities, but it's really exploiting the way things work, not necessarily a specific flaw. So the vendor's like, this is how things are supposed to work that are defined by standards in our implementation of these standards. This is how things work. Therefore, there's nothing for us to fix. It's kind of they're kind of passing the risk down to the users and customers going, this is your problem. Like, we've implemented this system.
Like Bitbucket configuration.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a risk rather than a vulnerability.
So this seems either like from more of a political and a business perspective, either a partnership limiting move is what we call this. Mm-hmm. You know, by being an IAM security company and calling out another IAM security company.
I think Authamize, and again, this is not backed by a whole lot of research, but I think Authamize is like they say, apply zero trust to your IAM. So they're like a security layer on top of your Oktas of the world. And their research team is going, when we're trying to help you secure your IAM systems, we're noticing like there's clear text passwords being transferred in certain situations. I mean, they walk through in detail these attacks. And so, but like, I get what you're saying, Adrian, of like, they're not necessarily partnering with Okta, they're applying a security layer on top of those type of systems.
Well, no, I'm saying they're shooting themselves in the foot, maybe, because they probably have to do business with the Oktas and the Pings and the One Logins and the Microsoft Azure ADs of the world. So it's a little risky to release something like this in their position, or it could get them acquired. These kinds of things, can go either way from a business standpoint. But as far as what they're doing, I'm still trying to understand exactly how it looks like they're complementary to an Okta, and they do a lot more in the visibility front on actually mapping out who has access to, who has what privileges on what platforms across several platforms.
But passwords over HTTP, like I'm trying to figure out like where this traffic is actually going, and like if this is the case, like why would that ever happen in a modern app, especially one that is security related?
So like one of their attacks was an app admin can extract all Okta passwords of all app users by redirecting SCIM provisioning protocol. And like the attack scenario they go through is like an attacker has to set up their own SCIM server. Then the Okta admin has to log in as an admin, install the application, trust it, and provision users to that target, and therefore you can gain all the passwords. I think that's why Okta's like, this isn't like a vulnerability in our product. Like this is a like design process kind of failure. So like it's almost like the doctor thing. Like it hurts when I lift my arm. Like, well, don't lift your arm. Like people can steal all your Okta credentials if you trust this rogue, SIM server. Well, don't do that. Yeah. And that's just one example. I mean, they did have unencrypted HTTP channels. But like in that attack scenario, it's like configure the target URL to be HTTP and not HTTPS based. Like don't do that.
I mean, the fact that the blog post has a section titled "Are these vulnerabilities?" That lets you know that this isn't a slam dunk. This is more of a it's going to be a combination of social engineering plus like maybe some poor architectural choices, design.
I mean, I do like the description and like the attack scenarios. Like this is how I would write an article. Like I chain together a bunch of misconfigurations and what I see.
Yeah, this
like,
is you're right. This is misconfiguration leads to compromise, and if you're using Okta, you should read this and like make sure that you don't do this, and make sure your process and procedures are like double checking and making sure you don't fall into some of these misconfigurations for sure. I think it served as a good guide for that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, props to the author, Nate Nelson. Like most journalists get this wrong. Most folks writing articles like this, just kind of rehash what the press release says.
Yeah, and like, the sky is falling. They said the sky is falling. Yeah. This is what happens, right? Like
and they parrot it. Yeah.
Do you guys keep tabs on the Vault 7 leaks? And
yes, a lot.
This story is interesting,
BS.
Right? So just a little background, right? Tyler is this guy. What's his name? Joshua Schultz, right?
Yep.
Like I think Wired or someone wrote an article that like detailed everything that happened at the CIA when he worked there. Like the interactions between Joshua and his coworkers, all the things that were said, the kind of hostile work environment, from what I gathered reading that article that ensued. Then the Vault 7 leaks happen, and then U.S. government prosecutes Joshua Schultz and says, like, you did this because you were a disgruntled employee. Now, the first trial against Schultz, he had an attorney that representative, and they called a mistrial because the jury couldn't agree on all the charges. So the second time they went to trial, Joshua chose to defend himself and lost. I mean, no, like, surprise there.
I just dropped that Wired article into the Slack and into the Discord.
Thank you. It was a Wired article. It was a great read.
From 2017.
Yeah, great read. And so, but this all stems from the Vault 7 leak, which was it WikiLeaks? Vault 7 is how Vault 7 got out, was through WikiLeaks, and it was like the CIA's basically, their playbooks,
their offensive toolkit.
Yeah,
it did a ton of damage. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like this damaged the U.S. Yeah, it burned a lot of the U.S. Tools and capabilities and tradecraft. Like some of the stuff was older, and like some of it was in use, some of it wasn't. But it gave insight into things that were not designed to be leaked out. So this sucks. But you look through some of the details, and I won't say whether he is guilty or not guilty, but if I was the CIA and I was trying to make this disappear and not come back up, and we needed scapegoats, like he is guilty. A pretty good target for that. And this is how this is the MO of the CIA. If they don't want someone out there, like they make it disappear and they make it get covered up and they disappear and have a scapegoat. Like this is one of those that I am very skeptical about his actual involvement, where hundreds of people had access to the same thing. It could have been anybody, but who's to say it's not him? It was damaging to the U.S. efforts, and I don't agree with any of the WikiLeaks stuff. Like even getting it out in the public and letting people know, like, yeah, they can do that. They're doing some of that. There's misuse and abuse of a lot of the tools in NSA and CIA. Like that happens, but the cost versus reward of having that leaked and burning ops and getting people killed and having our toolkits not be able to be used and have to redevelop those, that's a bunch of bullshit. Like people should burn for this kind of stuff. But and the scapegoat, like I don't know if he is the guy. That's pretty like tangential, but he was guilty.
That. I think Tyler, you and I need to host a show called Conspiracy Theory Weekly. Tyler, you would be a great primary host for that show. Also in this, there is a sentencing date was not immediately set because Schultz still awaits trial on possessing and transporting child pornography. Which, if you're going to have a scapegoat and you want that scapegoat to go away for a long time, you're going to plant something and charge him for child. Like I hear, hey, you heard it here first on Conspiracy Theory Weekly, right? Like that's what you're going to do. And as Tyler, you said, like that's totally the MO of the CIA. Like
it is.
That's pure speculation.
But wow. This is crazy. I'm looking at all the counts here, and he was found guilty on 9 of 13 counts. And 3 of those 13 counts were child pornography related.
Right. Crazy.
Yeah, and U.S. government, like, in order to work for USG and to do a lot of the missions and maintain your sanity and to be a part of that mission space, like, you have to be a certain kind of patriot in the first place. You don't get paid well doing that. You're not making a fortune doing it. So, again, I go back to the fact that, like, this bleeds scapegoat because he was in there, part of the mission, obviously believed in the country, and he would know the level of damage that this would do. So thinking through the logic side of this, I just don't see it even in a bad workspace. Like you can quit and go do something else.
And he's 33 years old, maybe?
He was 33 at the time.
At the time that this was released, he was 29. So, 10,000 images and videos of child pornography.
That'll do it.
Yeah, what was the original article that you posted, Adrian? Was that older or was that fairly recent? Because I had flagged up.
This stuff is old. Yeah, so the Wired article was March 2017, and then the Justice.gov article post was a little over a year later, June 18th, 2018.
I'm trying to figure out. I had an article that I had flagged that was like a awesome article. I'll find it and post it later. But it was like an inside look as to everything that was happening inside of that CIA office that led up to that. Like it went in depth about the complaints about him, the arguments, the whole thing. Super interesting. I don't know if that was based on the court proceedings from the original trial. Because I would think all of that would come out and then be public knowledge, since it was a trial.
Some of it may be
court.
redacted, but I would guess you could get access to the basic ideas.
Well, anything classified would
the details would be redacted, but you could see.
Well,
what
like the
happened
interactions between employees would not be classified, and that's probably what they used to base this article on.
Yep.
So it was not the one, Adrian, that you posted, but I'll dig it up.
So yeah, to Tyler's point, the way that they were able to detain him was the child pornography charges only. Good Lord.
Your camera keeps going blurry.
It's terrible. I'm swapping it out until I work out these bugs for tomorrow for ESW.
And you have that on a Mac or a Windows system?
Windows system.
And that's
your hands are very well in focus. Yeah.
But in what camera?
I'm not telling the company because they don't support Windows until this fall. So
okay.
Yeah.
But that's a really cool. You posted it in the chat, Adrian. That's a really awesome camera.
Look at that. That's amazing. So if it stays like this,
when it's good, it's good.
It looks amazing.
That looks pretty good.
They basically tout it as like better than what's on a Mac, and even better than you can get from a DSLR, because DSLRs weren't really made to be webcams, right? So I can see like a market for that. Logitech Brio is kind of in that
Brio
space.
Is really, that's what I have.
It's really good, but this was like a new company, $300. We make a camera that a webcam's going to be awesome.
So my challenge here is I have a teleprompter. I'm looking at you on a third screen that's on. It's actually on an iPad.
Maybe it's the teleprompter that's messing with the autofocus too.
It's not.
Well, if I was in support for this company, that's what I would say.
Have you tried rebooting it?
No, actually, no, I haven't.
Well, why don't you just do that and get back to us? And
but yeah, so I couldn't put a I couldn't even put a smartphone in here, much less a DSLR, because there's a wall right behind this teleprompter, and I can't easily access the controls or the zoom or the any of the physical buttons or lens pieces on a camera. So I need a webcam in here, because once it's in there, it's staying in there. I'm never going to physically touch this thing again once it's in there.
You say that now. I
don't want to.
I know. I do that too, but I don't want to. But then I do. I just can't stand it, and then I end up crawling on the floor. I was doing that today. I was like, I'm going to put this here. I'm going to leave it, and then I was like, I wonder if I could check. And then Paul's harassing me about my memory, so I was like, well, maybe I need more memory.
You need to build a whole new computer.
I know.
You need to.
I do. I try to do that every 2 years. I build a whole new one.
And how long have you had your current one?
About a year and a half.
Oh, so we're on the
getting
cusp.
there, and I'm thinking 512, RAM.
Oh, so you're gonna one up me.
I'm gonna go 4 processors and 512 RAM, 2 video cards.
You're gonna go Xeon dual processors?
Just kidding. I don't. What the hell would I do with that? And
That's ridiculous.
But it's not the point, Doug. The
no,
point
I
is
know it's not the point.
You and I have to build the most ridiculous computers.
I know we do. We should do it on the show again, because that was a really fun episode. Yeah.
I don't think
that was a fun episode. I watched that.
That was my favorite episode I think I've ever
Doug,
done.
I mean, for our listeners, Doug and I built a computer live on the air.
Yeah, and you can watch it too.
And you can.
And the whole episode starts with a hammer.
That was not planned at all,
wasn't it?
What's that?
Isn't the case bad?
Oh.
Yeah, the case came in damaged.
Yeah, Paul had to beat it with a ball-peen hammer.
Yeah, we beat it with a hammer to get it back into space. So
all your best builds start with a hammer,
right? But
I will definitely fly in for that episode.
Yeah,
we should do that. We have Tyler fly, and we'll just have like a whole day.
But I've not built a computer that has more than one physical CPU.
Oh, really?
So that would be interesting.
We should build at least a double CPU or a 4
like a
CPU.
double Xeon
Or a 4 Xeon. I built a 4 Xeon once. It was so badass.
But that's for VMware or something.
No,
right?
it was for password crack.
Those are like 24 core a piece, aren't they?
It wasn't at the time, but yeah, it was like crazy monster. It was like one of those TN Tiger motherboards that supported like four Xeon processors, and each processor had something like, I think each processor had 32 gigs of RAM, which was at the time it was a while ago, so it was a lot. It was fun to build though, and I put it in a server rack case, and it was being used by a organization to crack passwords.
Do they have liquid cooler? Do you have to put in multiple?
Yeah, you have to have 4 radiators,
or double 4 liquid coolers.
Or well, no, I mean for 4 radiators for liquid cooling, so you have 4 separate ones. You'd have to get a monster. It would be cool. Or you get a big, huge one and put it outside the case, like a swimming pool sized one, like one of those little kiddie pools.
This whole segment started with cooling.
Yeah, I know, and now we're back there again, right? It's like a kiddie pool.
It's a really cool segment.
Yeah, we had a kiddie pool with a cooling radiator in it.
But that's the thing. Like, where do you go? Like, I have a 24 core Threadripper with 256 gigs of RAM.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you go from there? You just gotta
go more. You got 2 of those.
But then you can have 512 of RAM, right?
Yes,
you
could.
Get 2 banks.
If you can find a motherboard that was, I don't even know if you can get a motherboard that would support that. I haven't looked.
Oh, that's a good
You might be
question.
able to though, man. They make some crazy.
You might have to go Intel to find a motherboard.
No, yeah, you'd have to go Intel, but you also have to maybe go into like modular, like where you have card slots and a modular.
And this is for our workstation. Just
well, yeah, it's just for a workstation, so you can play Minesweeper and watch porn, but. But it's so much fun. I mean, I never
keep one-upping ourselves.
I never use 10% of the capacity on the machines I build because I just want to build these big machines, and it's so much fun to try to get them to work and get them to work. And then my friend Lou, who died, we used to benchmark them, and that was all we did with them. I mean, Lou spent like $4,000 on a desktop computer one time just so we could benchmark it. And that was all we did with it, and it was just like.
Should we set a budget though?
Well, you have to. I mean, that's part of the criteria. So I have had students do this before, and I had some students challenge me once to a build off, and we had to set budget because we only had so much money, and so we each had $2,500. So that was fairly limited. But it was like, who can do the best benchmark?
But I think for the systems we're talking about, $4,000 is like the
4 to 5. I would say, for what you're talking about, because you start getting into multiple processors, motherboards get expensive, and you start having that much RAM, isn't it expensive? But it would sure as hell be fun to build.
Because we gotta break the 256 gig of RAM barrier now.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think the only way to do that is multiple.
You'd have to have multiple. I don't think there's anything that supports more than 256
on a single processor.
On a single processor, yeah, you have to go to a double processor board. But those TN server motherboards, and then you get into ECC RAM too. So you got to have ECC RAM for all that
because you have so much of it.
Yeah, they just require it. They want it to be that high level stuff. So yeah, but if you set a budget for $5,000. We see the sponsor. Somebody wants to sponsor us to build.
Tyler wants to fly out to help us build.
Then Tyler will fly in, and he can actually.
I'm all for it.
So we just need somebody that wants to sponsor the segment and have us build this crazy computer. Because that was a fun show that we did.
It really was.
If you haven't watched that, you should go watch it. It was fun.
Definitely. Where do you want to go from here? TikTok is an unacceptable security risk, according to Malwarebytes. We're back to this again.
Imagine that.
We're back to this again.
I was talking about that to somebody today. There was a panel of TikTok. Oh no, it was you, Paul. It was on the Security Weekly Slack. We're at B-Side San Francisco. I sat in on a panel of TikTok cybersecurity stars.
Wait, that's a thing? Like
but they had almost 1 million followers, or more than 1 million followers. It was crazy. It was TikTok. Huge.
And talking about cybersecurity on TikTok, they had more than 1 million followers.
So the current generation of people getting into cybersecurity, they're all on TikTok. So absolutely, there's this huge audience on TikTok. And they're basically talking about their experiences as content creators on TikTok and answering questions about that. And and it got real frosty. It got real awkward when somebody. I think they literally said, "I'm going to ask the elephant in the room question."
Yeah.
TikTok being China owned, being Tencent, being I mean, almost verbatim, they basically gave the PR line of, "Oh, it's fine. It's all based in the U.S. now, and there's nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. Everybody move on." And that was, I think, early June, and then it was mid-June when those 80 recordings were leaked about how the fact that people on the Chinese side had backdoors to everything.
I mean, is it backdoors or really just about the data they collect and where it goes?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, you look at, I just dropped something in Slack. It's pretty invasive as far as permissions. I mean, you've got everything down to complete clipboard access.
Front doors.
Yeah, basically front doors.
Yeah, it's a back door. It's like you let them in. Yeah.
But why?
They company.
Should
they don't
Apple
need back doors,
right? But should
it's like missionary
Apple,
style versus doggy. It's just gonna happen how it's happening, direct.
Should Apple and Google allow an app in their various apps, in their respective app stores, I should say, that allows an app to have this level of permissions? I mean, sure, you might ask the user to grant that, but where's the line? I feel like TikTok's right on the line.
I just think
Apple
it
and
should
Google
be
might want to get rid of it, but
I just think it should be disclosed. I mean, as a kind of vaguely libertarian person, I'm like, if you want to, smoke cigars, smoke cigars. You want to install TikTok, install TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, they had to do net flow analysis, basically tear apart the net flows, the app, look at all of the integration and permissions and what was talking across the network and going where, in order to even pull the information out of what this app was doing and what it had access to. Even going through things like VPNs, certain pieces of data were ending up in interesting locations.
It's definitely a snaky app, and I don't like it, and I didn't install it on my stuff. And people send me TikToks all the time, and I just have to watch them in a browser because I'm not installing that.
No, I do the same thing, But at the end of the day, you know what? There are content creators on TikTok, and they're creating pretty decent content about cybersecurity stuff. And cybersecurity folks are learning from that and getting into the industry and stuff. And I mean, and China has access to that, but it doesn't negate the good that some of these creators are doing on the platform. I mean, the content is still good content, even if it's on a questionable platform.
I mean, I guess if I was going to use it, I would have to do it on a burner or something and just put it on there. And if I was doing another show like Secure Digital Life or something, I think it would need to be on TikTok if you wanted to be competitive.
Yeah, no,
I'm not cool enough to be on TikTok.
Interesting thing. I asked them about what kind of analytics they got from the TikTok platform, because Twitter has analytics.
Yep.
On who's reading your stuff, who's following you, engagement, that kind of stuff. YouTube has lots of analytics. And it was interesting because, so again, they volunteered this information. They were like, and I think this is on YouTube now. I think all the talks from B-Side San Francisco are now on YouTube. And they said, it's interesting. When you sign up for TikTok, they don't ask for your gender or your location. They don't ask for all this information, but they just know it.
Yeah, they just get it. I like how Adrian has to do Adrian does the Jedi mind trick.
He does.
When he's talking
now. An indicator of something.
He's really not going out of focus. He's just doing the Jedi mind trick.
He's clearing
everything I say. You will
clearing the haze.
The UK heat wave has caused Google and Oracle cloud outages.
I did want to talk about this.
That's pretty. I think we kind of forget that even if we use cloud, there's still a physical server somewhere. And that server needs to be cooled. I mean, we feel that struggle here in the studio. I mean, it was a hot day here. We broke way over 90 degrees today, I think, in Rhode Island. And anytime that happens, the best you're going to cool ambient temperature in the studio is maybe 75, 76. Now you go into the server room, we're probably 78, 79, I would venture to guess, in our server room. And if that's a sustainable temperature, your cooling starts to fail, and your system, I mean, the subsystems in modern PCs and servers are going to naturally just start to like close things down.
Yep.
CPU's getting too hot.
And I guess I was talking to somebody and trying to get a new consulting job, and they basically, this was something I ended up talking about, because I was like, you need to remember that physical security and this disaster stuff that we used to talk about all the time,
disaster recovery,
has not gone away, and this heat thing really accentuates that idea, because we used to always talk about weather and out of band and all these kind of ideas about, your server rooms are here in Dallas. Okay, maybe that's safe, but what if there's an earthquake or whatever? And the cloud hasn't really alleviated that. It has a little bit, but then I saw this story, and it was like, these massive heat waves in Europe, and I was just in Europe, and it was really hot, and there's no air conditioning, and the grids are not set up for this kind of stuff. And we've seen that in the U.S. and Texas and so forth. They have power grid problems. California's having power grid problems. And so what I was telling this person was, one of the things you need to be thinking about is, what are you going to do when there's rolling blackouts, or there are brownouts that are being caused by massive heat waves causing people to run their air conditioners harder? And where's your cloud? And you say, oh, it's in the cloud, everything's safe. But I'm like, are you sure? Are you really sure about that? Or is the cloud going to start browning out and blacking out too? And hopefully not, but you need to think about it.
The best architecture and companies that really do it right are able to rotate through regions and have that level.
Absolutely.
But
have you tested that?
Yeah.
And so that was my point.
It's engineering, but to your point, it's engineering and testing.
It's engineering and testing. So don't let a marketing company tell you all is well. Don't worry about it, because here's a story right here that's from, and we're not talking about Doug's storage service. We're talking about Google and Oracle. And are these kind of things, which are going to become more common in the near future, are these rolling blackouts and brownouts and power problems and heat waves, are they going to cause issues with this? Because you can imagine trying to cool a massive dark server room in Texas, where I used to work in one, and this massive dark server warehouse. There was crazy amounts of HVAC just to try to keep this thing under control when the temperature was 30 C and 32 C. And now that the temperature is going to be 40 C down there every day, can you count on it? Is it still going to be there? And you say, oh, it goes to another region, it'll be fine. And I'm like, does it? Are you sure?
Yeah, Europe right now is getting hit with like record highs.
Oh, yeah, like crazy. I was in Switzerland, and there's no air conditioning in Switzerland, right? It's like a mountain country, and it was like nuts. It was so hot. It was like 35 C in Switzerland, and you're like, okay. And so just ambient temperatures in Europe are causing problems for people's computers. I mean, rooms that were never designed to be 35 C are 35 C or 40 C, and then you got a computer, and the computer's
well, then you wonder like what your backup systems and backup cooling, if it is a rolling brownout situation, it's a great question, like does your backup and disaster recovery handle those temperatures?
And
like,
they go, we got a generator. And I'm like, can your generator operate in that temperature environment? Because, again, in Europe, it didn't used to get this hot. And, there's countries, I mean, in Switzerland, less than 5% of the buildings have air conditioning because it used to not be that hot. You took a sweater.
The other thing that people stop thinking about in disaster recovery too is the amount of data that we're dealing with now in order to do a disaster recovery. And if you have a hard push on the pipe where other people are having to do that same disaster recovery, store from backup, you can only push so much data across a certain line and pipe, and it takes so much time. Like that may not even be feasible to get back up and running from the cloud.
And so don't get complacent, with this idea that, we're in the cloud, everything's cool, because it may not be. And that's that engineering testing model that we pitched and pitched and pitched. And, it's sometimes people have to learn hard lessons, but it's bad if you're out.
Yeah, I remember the one time I went to Info Security Europe in Olympia, London. There's no air conditioning in that conference center.
Yeah,
and so some of these vendors had actually splurged for these booths with private meeting rooms within the booth.
Yep.
And all the lighting was halogen lighting in these booths, putting off all this heat. And I remember having this one meeting with I can't remember the name of the company, but somebody was assigned, and we took turns fanning the door, like standing at the door and just moving it open and closed and open and closed.
I was doing a presentation. I was doing a presentation in France one time, and it literally was like crazy, unusually hot, and I thought I was going to pass out because same thing. They had these halogen lights, and it was so hot, and there was just like a few little windows, and it was really cooking in there.
I want to transition to another story, and it's interesting, your story about Debian, Doug. I remember being in university in the same building as computer science, where or it was a separate building, but someone from computer science was there, and they were a Debian-based shop. At the time, if I was there, it was somewhere between 2004 and 2007. And the person mentioned, there's this new Debian derivative called Ubuntu coming out for the desktop. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because I run Debian on my servers as well, largely because the students that would work for me, they came out of the computer science department, all knew Debian.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, well, this is great. And if I had questions, I could go to the university's computer science department and go like, hey, how are you folks handling this particular problem? And like when you upgrade to this, like what problems did you see? So it was like it was a Linux OS selection based on environment, right? Mm-hmm. And your article is interesting. It takes me back to that time, which is also an amazing kind of overlap that you probably weren't anticipating, is that Debian based its releases on characters from the movie Toy Story. Uh-huh. I worked, and anyone can go see this on my LinkedIn, it's not a secret, I worked for Brown University. Brown University's computer science department back in the 90s, a majority of those folks went to work for Pixar and did the initial work on the first Toy Story movie. The character, it's rumored, it's like a pretty good rumor. I've heard it from enough people and fact-checked it enough to say it, and I don't know for sure, but they named the character Andy after a very famous computer science professor at Brown University whose name was Andy. And that the Toy Story developers came out of the Brown computer science, worked for Pixar, named the character Andy. Also, Debian was the operating system of choice. So we've got like all these like really cool parallels to that whole thing.
Yeah, so. I loved Debian when it came out, and we were using that. That was our first sort of migration away from like Unix-based systems and onto this sort of Linux-based Debian world. And really got into it. It always remains to be like a more stable option. Like it's older software, so if you're trying to do newer stuff, I think that's why I eventually made the transition to Ubuntu, even on the server side. Yeah.
Because I wanted the more modern stuff to be in a little faster clip than Debian was providing.
Well, in the late 90s, we were trying to get students... I really had an obsession with getting students involved in command line stuff and using Linux and Unix and all these kind of things, because a lot of them, especially security... And I had a security program. So I actually started a cybersecurity program in 1999 and was trying to get students off of the... click on the clown's mouth, as I always called it, kind of Microsoft world, because a lot of the students had not had a strong background in security or low-level stuff. And we wanted them to do this. And the first one we started was a SUSE, which was German, and we translated the German documentation to English. And I like SUSE, but then when we were using Debian on some servers, including a version of Debian called Sarge, which was running EBCDIC. An EBCDIC version of Debian that was running, and we were running that on a mini computer and some things like that, and just sort of migrated right on into Ubuntu when it came out because it was easier. SUSE kind of was like flailing and seemed to be sort of not, it was kind of going away. And Ubuntu came out, and I was always just sort of searching the environment for distros of Debian because I liked that pretty well. I had used BSD a lot, and so I had been a BSD person, but the students really struggled with BSD, and they didn't seem to be coming out with user-friendly versions, and I wanted students to run...
The package management in BSD was not as user-friendly, if you could use that term. It was Debian.
It was pretty user-friendly.
OpenBSD?
Yeah.
It was later, but when we first had it, it was really hard to use, and the students really struggled with it. And I wanted them to actually install a bootable version of Linux on their computers. Like not just have Windows, but actually have a Linux version that they used for various and sundry things, or Unix. And Ubuntu came up, and we used that. We used Mint later. We used Peppermint. I've used so many different distros of Debian.
Gen 2 Stage 1 installs.
What was that, Adrian?
No Gen 2 Stage 1 installs?
No. So we did Gen 2.
I did Gen 2.
Maybe.
My friend Lou and I were obsessed with Gen 2. We built multiple platforms that ran Gen 2, including a music workstation platform that almost killed us all.
I remember
I've told you that story before.
Right.
And between the video drivers and the audio drivers for that Turtle Beach sound card he had, I literally was ready to hang myself. I was like, Lou, this is it. I'm going down to the closet. I'm getting the rope. It's over. And he was like, have another drink. We'll figure it out later.
That's great that he was encouraging you. I think everyone needs to experience the pain of working on the same problem for weeks on end.
Yeah, and that was a bad one. I mean, we sat there at his house just like
Did you eventually get things working on
there?
Yes,
we got it to work. I mean, it was painful.
But you had to modify your drivers.
We wrote some drivers, literally. I mean, Lou was like, I was like, I think we need to write a driver here. And we actually contacted Turtle Beach. We contacted that sound company and their drivers, and they actually were very helpful and sent us a whole bunch of stuff.
But did they give you the drivers were probably proprietary at the time.
They didn't give us their drivers, but we were able to write like a bridge somehow. I don't even remember how we did that, but this is one of those things where it was really handy to be like a university professor, because you have a lot of resources if you work at a university, and there's always people at universities that are interested in all kinds of weird things, and you call them up and you say, do you ever work with this? And I called this computer science guy. It was a computer science engineering guy, and he was like, "Oh my God, really? You're working on that? That is awesome." And he came over and he was telling us all this stuff, and he gave us a whole bunch of tips and guidance, and then he helped us write some of the stuff, and we eventually got it to work. And Lou played a couple of chords through it and went, "Well, it works. All right, let's go have a drink."
And that was
That's the end of it. That, in fact, I will tell you right now, he's dead, so I can say this. In his house, which is in probate and is sitting somewhere, there is a computer that has Gen 2 on it, and the Turtle Beach sound card is still sitting in the middle of that room, and it's been sitting there for 20 years, and it's still sitting there right now. I started to steal it, but I felt like I was robbing a tomb, so I left it, and I was like, what on earth would I do with it?
I think you should bring it here to the studio.
I can't get it now. It belongs to probate.
You should have saved it.
I know, but there was so much stuff.
It's such a talking point. We're talking about Linux and Linux drivers.
Whew, it was an interesting problem.
It's probably not unobtainable either, Doug.
Well, I can get Tyler to go get it. It's just like, yeah.
Tyler might be closer to where that is maybe than we are. So there's that.
Oh my God, I got in trouble. We were looking for an apartment for somebody. I won't say who, and the person didn't show up to see the apartment, and I like pulled out the lock picks, and it was this person was like, no, oh my God, what are you doing? I was like, we just want to see it. No. But yeah, I should have taken the Gen 2 machine. It was still sitting there. But there was like 12 of these machines that had different stuff on them. Every one of them I wanted to save. There was a machine that had Fortran on it that was running DOS, and it still worked. And I started to take that one, and I started to take the Gen 2 machine. There was another music machine that was running, I think that one was running Ubuntu. And we had worked on these things crazy, because Lou had this thing. I mean, he wanted a workstation in every room of his house where you could play music and you could sit down and jam together on these computers. And it was really cool. So they had Scarletts and although we used Completes instead of Scarletts. I know you like Scarletts, but we used Completes, and every room had a Complete, and it had a plug-in and a mixing board, and you could plug a guitar or a keyboard in any room, and you could play with people in the other rooms in the house.
That's crazy.
And I did all the back-end network halls, so I pulled all the wire, and it was crazy.
Crazy stuff, man.
Yeah.
So we were talking about this Debian article. Was there anything else you wanted to
I just put it on there because I thought people might be interested in reading about it. I use Mint all the time for like various things because they're a little small, compact distro. But there's dozens and dozens of Debian distros, and I think there's more secure ones, there's less secure ones, and they're really nice. I like them. There's just my little plug for Debian.
Tyler, Adrian, what's your distro of choice? Pick your poison.
Windows?
We need to get Tyler on the Linux bandwagon.
I don't know. Ever since my, what was it, 2003, we had to compile Gen 2 drivers from scratch. Like, I just
Put you
don't.
right off.
I do it. I don't like Linux. I do it.
Well, yeah, everybody that's been through that got in that, like, oh my God, and then you compile.
Yeah,
and
but you
compile
earned your
and
stripes,
compile.
man. Like, you earned your right to run Ubuntu.
Yeah. I mean, you really had to earn it back then, though. I will say, because you had to, and then you did all those dependencies. I remember that. I remember one of the first times I got like a dependency list in Linux, and there was like 1,000 dependencies, and it was like, what the hell?
Yeah, I just couldn't figure out why anybody wanted to run Gen 2 when there was Knoppix out, and like I had all my tools there. Like I just went to Knoppix, and I thought that was cheating. So then I just felt I had guilt trip on Linux.
Well, I
don't look at it like
knowing
that.
Lou for Lou it was Kilimanjaro or whatever. It was like because it's there. I mean, and Lou always made the effort to get the most esoteric things he could find. He never did anything simply. So if why do something easy and simple when you could do it in the most horrible, complex way that takes forever?
I mean, I've been running Linux on my desktops for a good number of years now. No, I'm not looking back.
Yeah, I mean, I always have all my servers are always Linux servers, and so that's all we've ever run really for server stuff. And I
am talking to more people that are going to Linux on the desktop because M1 is not an option for them on
doable.
Apple, and they don't want to run Windows.
It's very doable. In fact, I had an article. I did put it in here. There was an article where they ported WordPerfect.
That's where I wanted to
Tavis.
go to.
Not they, Tavis.
Well, yeah, Tavis Ormond.
Wait, did you say WordPerfect?
This is the most Tavis thing ever.
So I'll date myself. I ran WordPerfect on OS2 Warp.
Oh my God.
Yep, that was my where we had all of our documentation. My first job in computers was writing documentation in WordPerfect on OS2 Warp. I feel like that.
I still have the disk installs for that, Paul, on floppy.
I have the OS2 disks. They're sitting in the probate house. Yeah, they're sitting on Lou's desk. They're still there. Like OS2 the 42 CDs or whatever.
At that time, OS2 was a great operating system.
It really was.
Yeah, we got it to run. You had to have some serious hardware.
WordPerfect on that operating system, though, in terms of like now what we have in the cloud. I think about I don't know if it's all
WordPerfect.
I don't know if it's all that dissimilar.
It's not an operating system, though. It's just
no. But I mean, like WordPerfect editing on that operating system was an experience. I don't know. It's all that dissimilar from editing on Microsoft in the cloud or Google Docs in the cloud.
It was all keystroke controlled, though.
You could control the
command line
with WordPerfect, though. What got me thinking when you posted this story, Doug, was you can control the tags. There was like a markup language, and you could go fix stuff in the markup language.
I've missed that my whole life.
Right?
I love that because you could see what was controlling all the formatting, and you could delete things manually. It was it was like editing.
Well, you're an
HTML.
academic. You must have edited in LaTeX, right?
Oh, of course.
It's
markup. It's very much like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's your heart.
But that was the thing I hated about Word was you couldn't see the formatting tags.
Right. In WordPerfect, you could.
Yeah.
So Tavis ported this to Linux
from Unix. Yeah. There was a Unix version of WordPerfect that they ported up. I don't even know who did that long ago.
And he ported it to Linux.
He ported it to Linux. So it'll run on Ubuntu.
He's a command line guy.
He is.
So I think that was the motivation behind this. Is he wanted WordPerfect on the command line in Linux because he works in Linux.
Yep.
So he ported it.
Why not?
As you do.
Is it open source now? I mean, it's so old.
Yeah. No, it's github.com/taviso/WP Unix.
So yeah, if you want it, there you go. You can get it, and you can play around with that and have a command line WordPerfect word processor.
A full version of WordPerfect 8 was released in a book called WordPerfect for Linux Bible.
I think I have that.
WordPerfect was Corel. Remember Corel Draw and all that stuff?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was actually really good.
It was. Yeah.
There was a lot of law firms that actually had a really hard time when they started not offering it as an update or integration to other software packages that were using WordPerfect. Yep. I remember that migration process. It sucked.
Well, they had the whole suite of WordPerfect Lotus 1, 2, 3 and DBase 3+.
I worked at CompUSA back in the day. We sold all this stuff.
Yeah, no, I had a training company, and we went around and did training for WordPerfect, Lotus, and DBase 3 Plus. So if you had that package, and we had a little rack of laptops when we come to your company and set them up and train all your people on how to use that stuff. The typists hated it.
I'm going to start creating all my blog posts now in WordPerfect.
There you go. I think you should. You should probably getting time to get close to wrapping up.
I think so. That was the story where I wanted to end.
Well, that's a good story to end on because that's sort of the end of everything. It's like at the end of the universe, you'll be running WordPerfect on Linux.
Yes.
And as we begin.
Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul Security Weekly. We'll see you next week. Over and out.